Well, thank you for joining us, and everyone here as well. Oh, here he comes now.
Hi.
Hey, Pablo.
Hi. I went to the restroom.
So to start, before we open it up for other questions, I wanted to ask, because watching the whole program, including the first two films, there's definitely this element of almost, for me, like scrapbooking or like a contact sheet, just all this information at once, and especially in your three films. And I was wondering if each of you could start us off by talking about how you kind of came to assemble and produce the actual, how you got to your final piece, because there's so much that goes into it, both audio and visually.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you also to everyone at the festival. I'm really happy to be back here in person. It's really nice to be able to present and watch the film with an audience. That's always very special. So for my film, it's this is a commissioned piece. It was commissioned for Ficunam, a festival in Mexico City, and they were wanting to make an experimental program in the festival that had never happened. Anyway, that's the backstory. But so this was my first commission piece, and I didn't have that much time to create something. And usually my process in my films is very long. So this was, something that I had to be done with a completely different way of working for me, like a new process. And so I couldn't shoot something new, and I went back to my old footage. So this is actually one shot of something that I had shot for the first time in Ecuador, where I'm from. But it was shot 15 years ago, and so at the time when I had shot this, the camera, I was using a Bolex camera, and something happened with the Bolex where the gate opened up, and so the film started jumping, and it created this blurred movement, this image, that at the time when I shot it 15 years ago, I just thought, this is an accident, it's a mistake, and I put the footage away. So when I was thinking about this film, I had always remembered this image of this horse, this like blurred horse, and so I went back to it, and basically I reconfigured that shot. It's a 28-second shot. That then now it's this 10 minutes. Really thinking, of course, about there's all these references to the illusion of movement in cinema and the persistence of vision and all of these things, but really for me it was a way of working with a material that can, from a mistake, you can create something completely different. And I mean, I can talk more about it later, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you're
Well, yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me at the festival. It means so much, and to be back in person, and thank you so much for being here today. So I've been making films about Hong Kong for my entire life. It's where I'm from, and it's where my practice is based. And so I've, throughout the years, I was formerly making these very abstract, dense films, that kind of, this idea of this repository, the storage mechanism to contain as much information and feelings about the place as possible, with the idea that the city will forever change. It's a city of disappearance, and this place where there is this kind of, before there was this kind of idea that in the future something would happen where the city would cease to be kind of the place that we've known it to be. And then in 2019, the anti-extradition protests began in full force. And these series of protests really kind of rocked the city. Everything, it really changed everything for the history of the city and the future of the city. And the city, was kind of overwhelmed by the protests. And there was so many things happening concurrently, and so the film was shot in the summer of 2019 and November of 2019, so two very different parts, like kind of parts of the progression of the protests. In the summer there was kind of a lot of hope from what might happen in the future, you know, or not relatively, you know. I think there are these images of like the million-person march, these time-lapse films of, you know, hundreds of thousands, they say up to a million people were on the streets marching. And throughout the course of the year, there were severe instances of police brutality. And these images that really just changed my notion and my relationship to the city in so many ways, you know. I'd spent my practice kind of romanticizing the place, kind of trying to find images that contain these kinds of my personal feelings about the place, you know. And I was kind of, after all these things that had happened, I was reflecting on, like, what do those images of beauty mean? What do those images that I had so much attachment to mean now that all these other things have happened, you know? And then I also returned to Hong Kong in November of 2019, when the siege of Hong Kong Polytechnic University was happening. So that was really kind of the culmination of the protests, and, you know, the whole university was surrounded. So there was like basically a roadblock around the whole university. And my father lives just a few hundred yards away. And so I kind of saw the whole thing unfold in front of me, you know. However, it was very strange because the university was right there, and you know, it was kind of thought of as being like the most live streamed protest to ever happen. You know, there was like, you could go on some website and there would be like up to 20 different concurrent live streams of what was happening on the ground. And so the things that were just outside my physical vision were actually just on the television right next to me as it was kind of unfolding. And so, yeah, I mean, and the film was then edited last year after the national security law that was introduced, which kind of restricted a lot of speech around the protests and really kind of made the citizens question what they were able to say at this current point. And so, yeah, I mean, so the film kind of contains this footage from these kind of key moments in the protests, as well as my personal archive of material that I've kind of accumulated over the years. And as I was saying, you know, I'm kind of reevaluating or kind of reviewing what those images mean in this new context, you know. And since it was a massive movement, it kind of dominated the whole city. And so I would find that, like, images that at one point didn't necessarily have a weight to them now took on a new weight, because they kind of, these images were like things that happened since the images were taken, you know. So yeah, I don't want to go on too much, but I just yeah, it was for me, in many ways, since you can no longer really openly talk about these things, but like, however, everyone saw what happened, you know. So I kept thinking about, like, where does the energy go? Where do these feelings and these expressions go when you can when you're no longer certain what you can say, what you can't say? They have to go somewhere, you know. And so that's kind of was the guiding force for making the film in a way.
Hi all. Well, thank you very much to being here, and thank you to Calandra. She is my support for my English, if it is too rustic. This is because that the name of the film, I shot the film in the new stalls in 2013 while I was attending Media City Film Festival, which is a festival in the between two cities, between Canada and Detroit, and Windsor, Detroit. And at the beginning, I went there with a 35 millimeters camera, a very old one. It's from the 20s, but I was very excited with this because that camera was used by Sigaberto, or I don't know, many many filmmakers from the late 20s and mid 20s. Yeah, it was a size icon. So, and I also took my Bolex, and I stay after the festival 1 more week. So I've been shooting in both cities during 2 weeks, and I talk about my rustic English because it was very important that the newest olds, because it has no easy translation to Spanish. The newest olds, it's like it's a bit impossible to translate. And I asked for some friends from London, also from Media City, and from different places, and they all say different things. So that for me was very important to make a concept of the film between the past and the present. I went there. I went to Media City. I was interested in the map. I love maps, and there is a curl and in that point, Canada is in the south of America. Did you see it? If you see the map, maybe you know because you live here. But for me, it was interesting, and the same problems. And when I went there, there was the Windsor Hume, and nobody knew a lot. It started in 2007, but I just should. But when the COVID-19 in 2020, it stopped because of the factory, which is in Sug Island, was shut down. Thank you. And so that was a point to recreate what I was looking for, because I knew some stuff. For me, Detroit was the idea of the Motor City in the 60s, and then I had the memories of the 1967 riot. Well, when I went there, the same problems, and now after 2013, the same problems were very fresh, no? Coming up. Okay, are the same issues, and also the issues with the workers and the environmental, because there is a contradiction, there is a problem there. I want to show it. I don't know, many problems. With African American people and the police, and that is strange for me, because 85% is African American. I heard in Detroit. So what? How can you have that kind of problem? It's a bit crazy for me. So it's an associative film, and that's why the title was. That's why así como llegué a esa película.
And that's how I ended up doing that film. Everything was associative.
Yeah.
Yo comprendo. So then, since all of you actually had used such old film to make these present pieces, I'm curious if you're now maybe looking into more old film that you have to make future pieces, or are you shooting new things now that you know, like, you can use a 28-second clip from 15 years ago and actually it completely succeeds as a film that you make today, or how you're shooting for your next film, basically, or thinking about it, even though you've proven that using what you already have can be completely just as successful?
Well, I between like 2018 and 2019, I filmed about like 6-7 hours of material, and I made 4 films out of that, which all screened at Lincoln Center. So yeah, I feel like I'm kind of done with. Well, I mean, I it's interesting because you know, so much is changing so rapidly. As I was editing the film, there would be these daily events, these daily things that would take place, that were just so confronting, and really, I think I forced me on a moment-to-moment basis to really reconsider, like, what do these images mean? What does it mean to capture an image of an event. That
You're talking about daily things happening in Hong Kong.
in Hong Kong,
Yeah,
on
yeah.
the news when I was in New York, because the last time I was there was in 2019 in November. So that's when a lot of the material was filmed. It was kind of like at the peak of the protests and when things were at their most intense. And they had closed the border, so I wasn't able to go back due to COVID. And so I was actually able to go back this past summer. And so revisiting the place after all that time, it's changed so much, and I feel as though every moment I was there, it felt like at once an amazing reunion, but also just it's very confronting moments of seeing kind of the propaganda and these different things that have been kind of taken hold in the space. So I've been working with 60mm film for quite some time, and so actually most recently I was shooting on 4K video. So it was kind of like a sign, the media is kind of an indication of this. I was still shot on film, obviously, when I was there, but there was something that felt the changing relationship to the place. It felt fitting that I was kind of working with a medium that was more plastic, that was more cold in a way. But yeah, I mean, I think this idea of reevaluating what an image means and the approach in which you captured an image, and your ideas behind an image, and like kind of reviewing those things over time in the context of the city, I think was something that was guided this piece, and I think will continue to guide the works in the future. The images I captured before everything changed are precious to me, because I don't think I'll be able to see the place in the same way again.
You. I don't know. I mean, that's a hard question, I think, because I think every project is different in my case. I do try to find new ways of making and experimenting with new processes, but also material. So I'm not close to that idea, but I think what links this to the rest of my films is that there's always, I really enjoy working with limitations. So either if it's the new material that I'm shooting or this old material, and almost like working with whatever you have. And I think that happens a lot when you shoot film, filmic material, because of course you don't have a lot of it, at least in my case. And so that's already a way to approach making. And this was similar in this case. And then also thinking about time, which I think you're saying something about reconfiguring the city. In my case, it was really about reconfiguring like the experience of time, physically, like literally in the film, but then also with the time of when it was shot, and this idea of revealing something that can only be revealed in time. Yeah, that was interesting, and I'm interested in working in that way.
I always start with shooting an image that I can't understand something not especially I don't know, a spectacular image, but it's something that I can handle, and I'm interested in shooting the real, not the reality, the real. What is real? It's something impossible. That impossibility demands me more. That's why I'm stopping the camera and shooting like playing ping pong, with the looking for something in the image that I can't have. It's impossible to have, to get. That's okay. Intangible, yeah. So, yeah. So the image, I cannot symbolize it with a word, and not also with the image. The image is just an image of the reality, of the real. So that's the way I start. And then I like a French word. I'm not French, but I don't speak French, but I like this word, which is après coup, which is something at the end that resignifica lo que estaba haciendo.
Something
Something at the end that algo al final que resignifica lo que estaba buscando.
So that when there's something at the end that re-signifies what I was looking for at the beginning.
Yeah. I don't know what I'm shooting, what I'm doing at the beginning. So it's an anguish moment, but at the end I look back and I understand what I was doing. So I find the title maybe. Yeah.
Thank you. I did get a signal, and I just want to clarify if we have time for maybe one audience question, or do we need to wrap up now? What? Oh, great. Let's take someone from the audience.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, because yes, sound is very important in this film, especially for me. I worked with a filmmaker who also is a sound artist, Martin Baus. He's a Chilean filmmaker. And it was the first time that I worked in this way with sound, so the way that the film is structured, it really, it's almost like I drew the structure because of this blurred image with the horse. I wanted to exaggerate that, so I took out the images where you can actually see the horse, and that's what you see in the second half of the film. So it's almost like a mirror to the first part, but with this revealing of what the image is. And so we worked really closely with Martin to make a score, like so in my case it was the visual score, and in his case it was the musical score. But what was interesting is that we weren't in the same city, so we would kind of send each other these pieces, and almost like correspondence. And then at the end it came together. So, but of course, I wanted the score to, of course, relate to each other and have the same structure, but they still need to be its own separate thing. So I hope that that's how it feels.
For my piece, I incorporated a lot of like Cantonese pop songs from the 80s. So these songs that were very, significant for Hong Kong culture generally and the Chinese diaspora. These songs that are signifiers of like a so-called golden age of like Hong Kong pop culture, essentially. And so I manipulated these sounds like very heavily, almost to an aggressive degree. This idea of like, if the film is about this idea of like the place changing forever, what does it mean to use these cultural signifiers of the space, of the place and the culture, and to completely just turn them on their head, to obliterate them, essentially. And like sound was also weaponized by using sound cannons and things like that during the protests. A lot of like pop songs were kind of blared at protesters. So that was kind of an allusion to that as well. And I feel as though I'm very interested in this idea of kind of like having two kind of concurrent emotional states, one being like your physical reality, and the other, as kind of alluded to previously, as being like a digital reality. This idea of the things that you see on your devices, what things that you see on the news, and how those kinds of two emotional streams can contradict and conflict each other, and how that can be something that holds dialogue between people. And so, yeah, I think I was very interested in using the sound as being the secondary layer to distract from the image almost. But then essentially, I was very interested, like kind of like manipulating these sounds, but then sometimes like taking my foot off the pedal, and like letting them play out almost, these moments of not respite, because I don't think they're really respite, but like, like letting the original sounds kind of play out for a moment, just to let them peer through, to let the past peer through in a way.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I recorded most of, not most of the sounds, but yeah, many of the sounds. Also, the end. I recorded it while I was there in 2013, and then I looked for archives from I don't know the Mocha. All the songs are from Detroit and Windsor. Because the University of Windsor, and there are two universities, they were recording the Windsor hymn, and all the sounds of the hymn are real. Also, the people recording are from citizens from Windsor, And the sound is, they are, the sound from Detroit are from 1967 to 1920. So it's that period. And I use both channels. I don't know how. Well, I think the best is in the middle. Stay in the middle because
Thank you very much, and thank you for the audience question. Thank you all for staying. Simon, Alexandra, Pablo.